Very heated. Kwame Kilpatrick argued passionately that he just does not trust his lawyer anymore, but the judge did not buy it, and she said Jim Thomas has to stay on this case. Now, as we were the first to report, this conflict of interest issue focuses on a witness. Well, that witness is Gasper Fiore, the owner of Boulevard and Trumbull Towing. Now, Fiore is the towing contractor cited in the indictment that charges Kilpatrick with bribery, extortion, and racketeering. Now, according to the indictment, Kilpatrick and Bobby Ferguson extorted Fiore by getting more than $90,000 from him. Now, the conflict arose because Jim Thomas represented Fiore back in 2005. But Thomas says neither he nor Kilpatrick realized that Fiore would be such a material witness for the government until a week ago on Friday when they got some grand jury testimony delivered to them. Kilpatrick told the judge that he and Thomas can't even communicate right now due to this conflict, and every conversation ends in screaming matches. But the government decided to drop the charges that involve Fiore. So the judge said there's no conflict and Thomas has to stay on the case.
Well, I think this is part of the process of moving forward. The issue was squarely put in front of the judge. She made her ruling, and now we have to get ready.
Is there really such a breakdown in the relationship as Mr. Kilpatrick described?
I'm not in a position to criticize or refute what it is that he said. That's what he felt. He said it to the court. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to trial now. And so at this point, pick up the pieces and get ready.
The core issue is twofold. One, that there is probably an actual conflict because Mr. Thomas is representing a witness. Secondly, now he doesn't trust him because he was not aware of that situation and not aware of that witness. You would think that also that perhaps the government should have keyed the court into this earlier. Under the Jinx Act, they have a right to withhold materials up until the time a witness testifies. But in a case like this, where they know there is a potential conflict of interest from the grand jury from quite some time ago, you have to wonder why they didn't disclose this early on, and then we wouldn't have a problem so late in the game, so to speak.
Now, as far as Jim Thomas is concerned, essentially, in a way, they sort of won one today. They got a charge dropped against Kwame Kilpatrick, but it was ugly to essentially see two people who have worked together since 2008 kind of try to divorce each other in open court. Kilpatrick was very, very clear in saying he just doesn't trust his lawyer anymore. But the bottom line is Jim Thomas has to stay on the case, and I have to point out that this could definitely become an issue on appeal if Kilpatrick is convicted. Reporting live at the federal courthouse in downtown Detroit, I'm Heather Catallo, 7 Action News. Joanne, back to you.
Yeah, I think that thought crossed a lot of people's minds. Heather, so much talk about this being a delay tactic.
Well, definitely the government was trying to hint at that in their arguments today. And of course, I cannot get inside Kwame Kilpatrick's mind, but legal experts tell me he had a legitimate issue. This was a big deal. You have a right to have your attorney not have a conflict, and this was a legitimate issue that had to be dealt with in court. The judge made her decision. She said if any other witnesses like this kind of issue come up in the future, they will appoint an independent counsel to cross-examine those witnesses. But as a defendant, he wants to go after these witnesses aggressively, and if your lawyer has represented one of those in the past, how do you do that? So if this comes up again, they will appoint an independent counsel.
All right, Heather Catallo, great insight down from federal court. Thanks so much, Heather.
And we are now joined by our friend, 7 legal analyst Jerry Gleason. And Jerry, this was it came out of left field, so to speak, but now it seems like it's behind us in regards to this federal corruption case. Where do we go from here?
We go right to trial. The judge has ruled that Mr. Thomas is going to be the attorney, and as Mr. Thomas said just a moment ago, he's ready, he's getting ready, and he'll be there. So I would expect jury selection and then opening statements.
A couple things I want to get to. What do you make of the ruling overall, Jerry? Did it surprise you, or were you kind of expecting this?
It didn't surprise me. Obviously, the timing jumped out at everybody. It's right before trial, and that obviously raises concerns as the U.S. attorneys raised. And Mr. Chambers, who you heard from, raised a similar good argument. Why didn't the government tell the judge? But I think at this point, the judge has ruled. He's been the attorney for this long. Doesn't look like they're even going to call the other client, quote unquote, as a witness. So I think we're in a good position.
Now that charge has been dropped, right?
Right.
Like Heather said.
Right.
Okay. All right. So that's one thing with that case as well. What do you think this does? I mean, obviously this is a broken relationship between Kwame Kilpatrick and Jim Thomas. Whether you believe it was a delay tactic or not, this is obviously a strained relationship. What does that mean for moving forward?
It sometimes makes it difficult. The judge has ruled Mr. Thomas is going to be the attorney,
right.
But it's tough when you have a client who doesn't necessarily like you if they agree on the strategy, that's great. But if there's a question of whether Mr. Thomas is really doing his all, as Mr. Kilpatrick raised in the affidavit he supplied to the court, then that can create a tension between lawyer and client during the trial.
All right, on the heels of what you just said, though, does that also set the stage for anything else down the road? Could Kwame Kilpatrick come back if he doesn't like a verdict or say something of that nature against his attorney?
Potentially, because we haven't seen how the trial is going to play out yet, and until that happens, we don't know all the issues. But certainly it's an appellate issue. Should the judge have recused Mr. Thomas in favor of a new attorney, that might be an issue down the road, depending on how the trial turns out.
It was just interesting reading the affidavit that was filed in court this morning. Heather mentioned very heated in the courtroom, and heated in this affidavit as well. Kwame Kilpatrick saying, "I do not know whether my attorney is protecting my interests or his interests. My last conversation with my counsel literally ended in a shouting conversation." So, rough road ahead, perhaps.
Right, and I've had shouting matches with clients and when I was prosecuting with police officers. That's not necessarily unusual.
Okay.
The really question is there a relationship there? Is it ethical? And the judge has ruled that it is for him to proceed.
All right, next step, jury selection as we continue on. We appreciate your time. Jerry Gleason.
Thank you very much.